Imagine living in a small American town in 1939. You've never left the state. The most exciting thing on the road is a Model A Ford. Then one Tuesday morning, something rounds the corner onto Main Street that stops every single person cold. A massive bullet-shaped crimson machine, taller than the storefronts, wider than the road feels comfortable with, humming with a low growl that rattles windows 2 blocks away. It has a glass bubble where the driver should be, sitting 10 feet off the ground like an aircraft cockpit transplanted onto a chassis. The side panels fold open hydraulically, like giant chrome wings, spreading to reveal a glowing interior exhibit unlike anything the crowd has ever seen. Nobody in that crowd had a word for what they were seeing, because nothing like it had existed before. What they were looking at was the 1939 GM Futurliner, and it wasn't just a vehicle. It was a moving argument that the future was already here. And somehow, the most fascinating part of its story is the one almost nobody tells. The Futurliner was eventually destroyed by the very future it spent years promoting. The machine predicted tomorrow so accurately that tomorrow made it irrelevant. Most discussions about the Futurliner focus on the obvious, the Art Deco design, the enormous dimensions, the chrome, the cockpit, and yes, all of that is real and genuinely breathtaking. But to understand why this machine matters, you have to start earlier, with a man walking through a fairground in 1933 and having one of the most consequential ideas in American corporate history. Charles F. Kettering was General Motors' head of research. Known as Boss Ket, he was one of the most prolific inventors of the 20th century. In 1933, Kettering walked through the Chicago World's Fair, the Century of Progress exposition, and watched 48 million visitors pay to glimpse what tomorrow might look like. He didn't see an exhibition. He saw a delivery mechanism for optimism. His observation was simple, but powerful. Ordinary Americans, especially in the depths of the Great Depression, desperately wanted a reason to believe things were going to get better. Science was delivering genuine miracles, but most people in small towns had no access to them. What if General Motors brought the World's Fair directly to those people? Not just once, but every year, to hundreds of cities. For free? He pitched the idea to GM chairman Alfred Sloan and VP of Public Relations Paul Garrett. They understood immediately. This wasn't advertising. It was something far more ambitious, a campaign to make millions of Americans believe in the future. By the time that first tour ended, 12.5 million people had walked through the exhibits. 12.5 million people. In an era before television, before any of the information delivery systems we now take for granted, the parade reached them all in person. But Kettering and Harley Earl GM's legendary head of design, the man who would later give the world the Corvette and the iconic Cadillac tail fin, decided that the streamliners weren't impressive enough. If the mission was to embody the future, the vehicles themselves needed to look like they came from it. So in 1940, 12 entirely new machines were hand-built by GM's Yellow Truck and Coach Division and Fisher Body plant. Each one cost approximately $100,000, roughly $1.7 million today. General Motors gave them a name that was deliberately, legally misspelled: Futurliner, without the final E in future. The reason was entirely practical. A real word can't be trademarked, but a made-up one can. Even the name was engineered with precision. Each Futurliner measured 33 feet in length, 8 feet in width, and stood nearly 12 feet tall. They weighed more than 12 tons. The design overseen by Harley Earl and executed by industrial designer Robert E. Bingman produced something that doesn't belong to any category of vehicle that existed before or after. Deep crimson bodywork, white roof, sweeping aerodynamic curves interrupted by large articulated chrome side panels that opened on hydraulic hinges to reveal the exhibit inside. The whole fleet earned a nickname among the people who worked with them: the Red Elephants. The cockpit deserves its own description, because there is genuinely nothing else like it in automotive history. The driver's seat sits at the very front of the vehicle, elevated high with a panoramic windshield. To reach it, you climb a steep internal staircase, 6 steps, and take a seat centrally positioned, eyes approximately 10 feet above the road. The original design gave this position a full glass bubble canopy, exactly like the cockpit of a World War II fighter plane. Without air conditioning, that glass canopy created a greenhouse effect that slow-cooked whoever was sitting inside. Drivers during the 1940 and 1941 tours described the experience as genuinely punishing. When GM rebuilt the Futurliners for their 1953 return, they replaced the bubble with a steel roof and installed Frigidaire air conditioning. The drivers, who had developed their own culture and called themselves paraders, reportedly appreciated this considerably. The driving experience was challenging beyond just the heat. The dual front axle featured 2 sets of side-by-side wheels rather than a standard single pair. The brakes were so unreliable that the convoy operated under a mandatory 300-foot spacing rule between vehicles. This rule existed because a Futurliner with failed brakes had once rear-ended the one ahead on a mountain descent. The damage was significant enough that GM quietly pulled that vehicle from service and never repaired it. There's something both absurd and oddly poetic about a machine designed to represent the pinnacle of human engineering being constrained by brake failures. The Futurliner was a monument to tomorrow that still had to survive today. Here's what I find most remarkable about the whole operation. The Parade of Progress was never a sales event. General Motors wasn't there to sell you a car. Admission was completely free. The 50 to 60 recent college graduates who drove and staffed the entire caravan weren't salespeople, they were educators. Each of the 12 Futurliners was assigned a single theme, outfitted with custom exhibits, and staffed by presenters who could explain what visitors were seeing. Think about what those exhibits actually contained. One Futurliner housed a full demonstration of jet engine technology, including a cutaway articulating model of an Allison J35 jet engine. Another showcased the household of the future, featuring a microwave oven that could fry an egg without burning a newspaper placed beneath it. Another demonstrated stereophonic sound, which most Americans had never heard. Another explored atomic energy. Another featured live demonstrations of sound traveling over a beam of light produced by an ordinary flashlight. An early demonstration of fiber optic principles shown to rural Americans in the 1940s. And then there was the television exhibit. Drop a comment below which of those exhibits would have blown your mind most if you'd been standing in that crowd. Because I genuinely can't pick just one. The Parade of Progress was, in the truest sense, a rolling university for a country that had no other channel for these ideas. The convoy traveled year-round, accompanied by a 44-vehicle support fleet and an aerodome tent that could seat 1,500 people at a time. By the final parade's end, in 1956, roughly 13 million Americans in nearly 300 cities had walked through those exhibits. There's a documented story of Don Mayton, the man who led the 7-year restoration of Futurliner number 10, breaking into tears at the dedication ceremony because a man came up to him and described being a child, the Parade of Progress, and never forgetting what he saw inside. That's what these machines actually were. Not marketing, not commerce, memory. The rebuilt vehicles carried updated engines, new cockpit designs, and expanded exhibits covering atomic power and advanced stereo technology. The parade premiered in Dayton, Ohio, and hit the road again. But something had changed while the Futurliners were in storage. Something that the parade itself had helped create. If you want a cleaner example of technological irony, I'd be genuinely curious to hear it. What ended the Parade of Progress, what sent those 12 extraordinary machines to their scattered fates, was television. Specifically, the television demonstrations that the parade had spent years showing to millions of Americans who'd never seen a screen before. By the mid-1950s, families across America had television sets in their living rooms. They could access science, entertainment, and technology from their own homes every single night for free, without driving across town. Attendance at the parade declined steadily. The final performance was July 4th, 1956. Fittingly, a holiday, and the red elephants rolled to a stop. The machine that taught America to love the future was made obsolete by the future it had taught America to love. That's not a failure. That's a kind of brutal, magnificent success. If you want to explore the full documentation on the Parade of Progress, engineering history, surviving vehicles, and restoration projects, I've put some links together in the description. What happened to the 12 vehicles after 1956 ranges from dignified to deeply strange. GM donated 2 to the Michigan State Police, renamed Safety Liners for road safety education. At least one was purchased by televangelist Oral Roberts and used as a portable stage for evangelical crusades, a machine that had once demonstrated atomic power, now traveling the revival circuit, possibly all the way to Central America. Futurliner number 10 was sold to Goebel Brewing Company in Detroit, which drove it to fairs to demonstrate the brewing process. There is a documented incident in which number 10 overheated during a promotional event, and having no coolant on hand, the crew filled the radiator with the onboard beer supply. The vessel that once represented the apex of American engineering was serviced with lager. One example was repainted and deployed in Canada in the late 1990s to promote a cell phone carrier. The machine that had once housed a jet engine cutaway was now a booth for mobile contracts. Of the original 12, 9 are confirmed to still exist. Only 3 have been fully restored to operational condition. Futurliner number 11 sold at Barrett-Jackson auction in January 2006 for $4 million. All proceeds going to the Armed Forces Foundation, one of the highest prices ever paid for an American vehicle at public auction. Department of the Interior, alongside a 1947 Tucker prototype and a 1964 Shelby Cobra Daytona Coupe. In September 2024, legendary restorer Rob Ida accepted one at his New Jersey shop for a full restoration back to its original 1939 appearance, the only surviving example that will accurately reflect Harley Earl's original design language, bubble cockpit and all. I keep coming back to one specific fact when I think about what the Futurliner actually represents. Every technology it promoted, jet engines, microwave ovens, stereophonic sound, television, atomic power, came true. Not partially, completely. The machine wasn't an optimistic gamble on an uncertain future. It was an accurate map of the next 50 years, drawn in 1939, driven free of charge into living rooms across America. The GM Futurliner didn't fail because its vision was wrong. It succeeded so completely that the vision outgrew the messenger. A prediction so precise it consumed the instrument that made it. There's a version of this story where that's a tragedy. A machine, this beautiful and this strange, ending up with its radiator filled with beer, or serving as a revival stage, or rotting in a field in the Catskills. But I think there's another reading. The Futurliner did exactly what it was designed to do. It went to places that couldn't access the future and said, "This is real, it's coming, and it's going to change your life." And then the future arrived. And it did. That strikes me as something worth remembering, not just as automotive history, but as a reminder that the things which genuinely matter usually end quietly, long before anyone fully understands what they were. If the history behind the mythology, the engineering, the irony, the stories that don't make it into mainstream coverage is the kind of content you want more of, subscribe and hit the bell. This is exactly what we build here. And if something in this video hit you differently than you expected, leave a comment. I read every single one, and the Futurliner conversation is one I genuinely don't want to have alone.